Downsizing state government will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Baker,
Here.
Vice Chair Schnelting, Representative Bangert, Ani, Bailey, Burton, Gray, Lavasco, Owen, Perkins, Person, Railsback, Sander, Taylor, Vanskoy,
Here.
We have established a quorum, and so today what we're going to do is we're going to exec on two House Committee subs here in just a moment, and then we are going to move into a hearing on House Bill 2009. So I move that House Bill 1619 be voted to pass. And I have a substitute. It has been distributed, and I move for its adoption. Any discussion? Yes, Representative Vanskoy. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a amendment ending in 05H that's been distributed to the members. I move for its adoption.
Any discussion on the amendment?
What? 05H.
Gentlemen,
Yes,
would you like to
I will
explain?
explain it, yeah. What this amendment does, it changes the wording on page 3, paragraph 7, line 44, where it says federally certified unmanned aircraft or drone pilots, and moves the word pilots after federally certified, making it federally certified pilots of unmanned aircraft or drones. So it's very clear that it's the pilots that are certified, not the machinery that's certified by the FAA rather.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the House Committee Amendment Number 1 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You've adopted the amendment. I now move that we roll the amendment into a new substitute, adopt a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying, oh, I'm sorry. Any further discussion or amendments? Yes, Representative Lavasco, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment ending in .03H. It's been distributed, and I move for adoption.
Please proceed.
This is real simple. We brought this up in the discussion when this bill was originally heard. This just changes the section regarding drones taking photos of another person and adds the words individually identifiable image, just to distinguish that if the drone is taking a picture of someone from far enough distance that you can't tell who it is, that we're not trying to rope those particular images into this bill. So that's all it does.
Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting House Committee Amendment Number 2 signify by saying aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You've adopted the amendment, House Amendment 2. Further discussion? Seeing none. Yes, Representative Burton, please proceed.
Just wanted to make a comment on this bill. This is once again goes back to what I believe this could not even be enforced, because once again, once the drone takes off into the air, that is FAA airspace, that's the federal government. We cannot override the federal government, and the federal government is looking into this. And I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade. I agree that there needs to be stronger regulations when it comes to drones. I don't want there to be a drone carrying an Amazon goods over my house or my community either, but we do not have the ability to override the FAA. If anybody can show me a state that has successfully done that, I would like to know. Congress has provided the FAA with exclusive authority to regulate aviation safety, the efficiency of airspace and air control, among other things. State and local governments are not permitted to regulate any type of aircraft operations. That is from the FAA. like I said previously, when it comes to the invasion of privacy, which I think is what this bill is really trying to do, which I understand, we already have invasion of privacy laws. Invasion of privacy is the unjustifiable intrusion into the personal life of another without consent. Intrusion upon seclusive laws protect your right to privacy while you are in solitude or seclusion. This right extends to you or your private affairs. For example, it's an invasion of privacy for a neighbor to peek through your windows or take pictures of you in your home. So we already have an invasion of privacy law. So if someone's worried about that, you can get a lawyer, you can go after that person. And once again, we do not have control over FAA airspace. And I know the gentleman's trying to do a good thing with this bill, but just for the fact that we're not able to do it, I'm going to have to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, Representative Benskoy.
Yes, the gentleman asked for states that have laws that regulate drones. In this manner, Kansas has a law, expands the definition of harassment in the state's Protection from Stalking Act to include certain use of drones. Oklahoma. Let's see here. The law prohibits the operation of UAS within 400 feet of any critical infrastructure facility. All drone pilots operating commercially in the state are subject to FAA's Part 107 rules. Arkansas. The law makes it illegal to use a drone to record someone who has a reasonable expectation of privacy. The law prohibits the use of UAS or to collect information about photographically or electronically record information about critical infrastructure without consent. There are others that go on. There are states that have regulated drones in this manner. It is constitutional. It can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yes, Representative Burton.
To respond to that, a lot of those laws, well, first of all, we do have drone laws. Like, for instance, you can't fly drones around some of the things that you were talking about already. You can't fly a drone over Busch Stadium. You can't fly a drone around an airport. So those are already in statute. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further discussion? Seeing none. I move we roll Amendment 1 and Amendment 2 into a new substitute, adopt the substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You've adopted the substitute. I now move that House Committee substitute for House Bill number 1619 be voted to pass. Any discussion? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Baker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Snelting. Aye. Representative Bangert. No. Ani. No. Bailey. Burton. No. Gray. No. Lavasco. Aye. Owen.
Aye.
Perkins. Aye. Person. Railsback. Aye. Sander. Aye. Taylor. Benskoy.
Aye.
All right, by your vote of 8 ayes and 4 noes, you voted House Committee substitute for House Bill 1619 do pass. I now move that House Bill 1735 and 1761 be voted do pass. I do have a substitute where we have rolled those numbers into one, and it has been distributed. I move for its adoption. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of adopting House Committee substitute for House Bill 1735 and 1761 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. You've adopted the substitute, or I'm sorry, you've adopted the, yes, the substitute. I apologize. I now move that the House Committee substitute for House Bill 1735 and 1761 be voted do pass. Any discussion? Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Baker.
Aye.
Vice Chair Snelting. Aye. Representative Bangert. Aye. Ani. Aye. Bailey. Burton. Aye. Gray. Aye. Lavasco. Aye. Owen.
No.
Perkins. Person. Railsback. Sander. Taylor. Vanscoy.
By your vote of 11 ayes and 1 no, you voted House Committee Substitute for House Bill 1735 and 1761 do pass. With that concludes the portion of our time as far as exec session. We will now move into public hearing, and we are going to hear House Bill 2009. Representative Pollock, please proceed. We're going to do this a little bit different. She has a couple of expert witnesses she will call on after a brief explanation entry of the bill, and then she will then after that explain the bill, and then we'll move into public testimony. Please proceed, Representative.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I'm Susie Pollock, District 123, and here today to present House Bill 2009. It seems to me that the most important question that we can ask a bill presenter in committee is what problem are you trying to solve? And so today I'd like to structure my bill presentation to answer a few questions with input of 6 expert witnesses, and then I will tell you how the bill will address the problems. First, we will give reason why we can't continue to trust the Department of Health and Senior Services with the powers they have without legislative oversight. Second, it would provide evidence that there are real and imminent threats from the Department of Health and Senior Services and the federal government operating through DHSS. We'll tell you about some specific recent abuses of power from DHSS. Number 4, we'll provide a legal perspective of the needs to modify the religious exemption for childhood vaccines and bring it into compliance with the Missouri Constitution. Number 5, we will provide evidence that there is a legitimate controversy over the use of vaccines and that one should not be that should not be left to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats to resolve. And number 6, will provide evidence that DHSS has influenced our health departments and caused a lot of personal rights violations. And so I'd like to call my first witness, Ron Calzone, please.
I would just like to mention that because of time restraints today, that we need to keep everything as concise and as brief as possible. We'll probably limit public testimony to 2 or 3 minutes and then proceed to questions. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Ron Calzone. I'm one of the directors of Missouri First. These handouts being distributed right now might help you understand what my testimony is. House Bill 2009 is about getting Missouri rules into compliance with the statutes and the Missouri Constitution, and it's about getting the Missouri statutes into compliance with the Constitution in different ways. And my role this afternoon is to explain that DSS has a history of ignoring laws, the laws that limit its power and its authority. And I want to tell you a little story that, Mr. Chair, I know that you're familiar with because you helped this story play out. It was on March 20th, 2020, early in the pandemic, that DHSS issued an emergency rule. Now, when you issue an emergency rule, if you look at the first page of that handout in yellow, Chapter 536025 has some specific guidelines that you must follow by law to issue that emergency rule. And included in that is you have to make sure that the rule complies with protections extended by the Missouri and the United States Constitution, and you have to supply a fiscal note. So we found out, we got a hold of the what's called the submittal packet that they used to promulgate this rule, and we found out that they did neither of those things. So the rule that was used early in the pandemic to close down businesses, to issue stay-at-home orders, masking orders, and all those sorts of things, they were illegal. They promulgated the rule illegally. They issued those orders illegally. And when we exposed it, if you look at the very back of that packet, you can see That took us a while to get all that done, but when you'll see that there was an order terminating the emergency amendment that should have lasted until January. It's because they got caught red-handed. And Mr. Chair, you may remember yourself being involved in that. One of the things in that handout packet is this letter that you drafted and circulated, and a number of your colleagues signed this letter, and it laid out all of the illegal things that DHSS was doing with their rulemaking and with their orders that they were promulgating. Now, that was prophetic, Mr. Chairman, because later there was the case Shannon Robinson versus Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, in which Cole County Judge Dan Green actually, in his opinion, used a lot of the things. I'm not saying that he referenced your letter, but it's incredible how his judgment against DHSS paralleled the things that you identified in that letter of, what was that, May 8th, 2020. And so I just want to spend another 15 seconds telling you, and the judgment from Judge Green is one of my handouts. I encourage you to go back and read it when you can. But he said that this case is about whether the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services regulations can abolish representative government and the creation of public health laws, and whether it can authorize closure of a school or assembly based on unfettered opinion of an unelected official. This court finds that it cannot. Those were some of the things that you complained about in your letter. The court concluded, number one, that the DHSS regulations and their use of them violated the separation of power principles in Article 2, Section 1 of the Missouri Constitution. He said, this is at the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page. Number two, it violates the Missouri Administrative Procedure Act. Number three, they're inconsistent with the public health law framework established by Missouri statutes. And number four, they violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Missouri Constitution. DHSS has been a rogue, unconstitutional, illegal bureaucracy. And when it comes to childhood vaccines, which of course is the subject of this bill, we think it's inappropriate for that kind of entity, that kind of organization, to be able to tell parents what vaccines their children must and must not have. We think that this legislative body should be the only ones that make that determination. And I will just say this last little bit. We can talk about it if you've got questions, or we can talk offline. I actually think their rulemaking authority to add vaccines to the schedule right now is not supported by existing statute, even though they've been doing it for a couple of decades. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions? Representative Burton, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you would rather have politicians make decisions on health as opposed to a health department?
I would rather have the people's representatives make those decisions.
Politicians. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If you can come up with a better way to do it, I would be glad to entertain it, but it needs to be the people's representatives.
Further questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness, please. Please proceed. I just want to remind everybody, make sure you fill out a witness form and turn that in prior to testifying. And you have 3 minutes.
Hi,
And please state your name as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Kramer, and there's a couple of handouts. There's one about the $1.9 billion dollars from the federal government, and then there's also a handout here regarding Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services from this January. And I'll go into those a little bit, and then you might have actually even been seeing those already. But I like to do research, and I do a lot of research. And when I found this information, there's just a lot out there. I found $1.9 billion had been slated for Missouri schools for the ARP ESSER 3, which is the American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And one word that kept coming up over and over again was the word incentives. The federal government worked through DESE and through the schools to incentivize their agenda. Their big goal was vaccines for children 5 years and older. Incentives involved encouraging community involvement of trusted people. Incentives included ideas of flyers, of social media ads and commercials, incentives such as new tablets or a prize or cash or even college scholarships, and even vaccines the vaccine clinics were encouraged and were held on school campuses here in Missouri. The state has also an incentive programs with $11 million that allocated for this program from federal money rolled out by DHSS. And here's a quote from one of an article that I read about this, because they were doing gift cards and lotteries, and I'm sure you all heard that on the news. And in the most visible success story in Springfield and Greene County, many of the nearly 1,000 gift cards issued went to children between the ages of 5 and 11, and not the vaccine skeptical adults that the program was originally intended for. And it referred that Mike Parson and the head of DHSS, Director Don Caruff, were also included in this plan. So then incentives. What's the difference between incentives and coercion? If a thing of value, the shot, is dependent on accessing other services, like you get the shot and you can do this, it's coercion. If a thing of value, a shot, is intended to get the person to do something that they are afraid to do or could cause them harm, it's coercion. So we need to stop using the word incentive and we need to use the word coercion. The shots planned for school children breaks the first ethical Nuremberg Code, and this is quoted, without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. In fact, when I researched it, it breaks all 10 parts of the Nuremberg Code. So this is something actually very serious. Many of the documents provided over and over again that the coercion for vaccines are real, with massive amounts of money from federal government funneling through the state, through the DHSS and DESE, and to our children, and to the schools. On this one, you'll actually be able to flip back and see the different schools and dollar amounts in there, so you can look up your own schools in your own districts.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your time has expired.
Going to give it just one.
If you can just wrap it up real quick.
I will. So DHS already has created a plan, and this is this other handout. It's a very detailed plan, and it's for children's age 5 to 11 years of age. And this is for the COVID vaccination. So the ESSER 3 plan, I also want you to know about this. It goes on until 2024. We are in 2022, and this thing is supposed to be winding down. There's so much coercion money that this vaccine will likely be added to the required schedule list. And you may see yourself as a politician. I, however, see you as an elected official, and you are the voice of when we see that there is a problem, we're able to work with our representatives and our senators. And so having a body of being able to make this decision that's elected versus someone that holds a position that they were appointed to is very important. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. For any questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Banger, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a notation here on the record. I do not remember seeing in our committee notice that came out when we were noticed up for this committee that there were going to be expert witnesses testifying while the bill is being presented. I have never seen a bill presented like this with expert witnesses as part of the bill presentation. I just want to put that on the record.
Thank you.
I will tell you, I'm not professional. I get no money.
I think it has been common practice in the past, so we will proceed. Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Representative Burton, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I 100% agree with Representative Banghart because it would have been nice to get that heads up so we could have our own expert witnesses to maybe debunk some of this stuff. Whenever you say coercion as in force, I don't know of any program right now that is forcing children to get the COVID vaccine. I know they've incentivized them. I haven't seen anything where they're forcing children to get the vaccine. Something that everybody should know here is that when the DHSS is appointed by the governor, he's not just appointed or she's not just appointed by the governor. They have to go through the Senate. And it's pretty tough to get approved by the Senate. In fact, the man who was recently appointed, who doesn't believe in forced COVID government mandates, who just believes the vaccines do reduce the chance of severe illness and death, he was voted down by the Senate. So whenever you just say, just appointed by the governor, that's not really telling the whole story. So
They're not elected.
Right, but they have to go through the Senate, and that's very difficult to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions, Representative Bangert, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to note out that we have new rules in committee as of, I think, last year or the year before, that witnesses are not allowed to sit next to the bill presenter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Pollock, if you wouldn't mind just stepping down for the next witness, thank you. I'm going to check on that and make sure.
Hello, Jennifer Barker, and I'm going to set my timer so I don't talk over my 3 minutes. I am Director of Informed Health Choice Missouri. I represent over 5,000 people in the state of Missouri for informed consent, and I've helped many parents trying to get exemptions for children in their schools. So I'm going to tell you some stories of specific abuses of power by DHSS. So in statute 167.181, section 3, it states that this section shall not apply to a child if one parent or guardian objects in writing to the school admin against immunization of a child because of religious beliefs. So we should be able to just write a letter stating that we are excluding our child from vaccination. But the health department has created rules and made lots of hoops for us to jump through. So when I went to get exemption for my child 10 years ago, I can recall jumping through some of these hoops, which now are way worse than what they were 10 years ago. We have one parent that had been attending a school for 5 years. Her children were at a school for 5 years. They had no problems with religious exemptions, but in January of 2020, they were told that they must get the official document on cardstock, Form 11, from the health department, or else the children would be kicked out of school. They followed the statute exactly as it was written, and their school did not accept by the emboldenment of the health department. Crossroads Academy was created a new word, disenrollment, in order to kick us out. They even refused to provide our children's current curriculum and progress information, leaving us to figure out how to educate our children. They wanted their children to go to this school. They did not want to homeschool, but they ended up being forced to do that. They tell me, do families seek a medical exemption have to endure the same kind of abuse? No, the abuse saved the families seeking an exemption because of their religious convictions. I do have to say I have helped parents try and navigate medical exemptions, which is extremely difficult too. This one is from Glen Eagle Elementary, refused to be without the printed copy stamped from the health department, demanding I must give them my personal information, my children's name, social security number. I had to fill out these forms in order to get the exemption form. Clay County, they had to meet, we would not have the forms available until mid-September. They were requiring for them to discuss with a nurse. The nurse interrogated us basically. St. Charles County, they made them fill out a one-page form. to receive the exemption. The form was identical to the religious exemption. They needed to give the address of the children. It's this information, when we submit religious exemptions, the school is not sharing our information, our address, our social security numbers, or any of that. But this is how the health department is gathering that information on us, which is public record. This other person had to make an appointment with the nurse and be lectured, and they had to sign papers of why they were refusing vaccination, and it had to be signed by the nurse. Another parent, they needed a nurse's appointment, and they were required to give the children's personal information. These parents are really concerned about why do they have to give their information to these health departments when that is not what state in statute. It states just a letter from the parent excluding them. So this is very concerning to us that DHSS is making their own rules and having parents go through this.
Thank you for your testimony. Further questions? Representative Perkins, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here and sharing with these stories. Could you maybe shine some light on when a child applies for a religious exemption and that exemption is denied, are they stating a reason why there's a denial?
So if they're denying the religious exemptions at the school, they're stating it's because it doesn't have the stamp from the health department, which is a rule
if I could ask, what qualifies the health department in determining how religious a person is?
There's no way that they should be.
Right, and I would like to go further and say that the health department, the court system, the school district, or this body has absolutely no authority to determine how religious a person is, and I think it's absolutely un-American for that to ever have been suggested. I mean, I'm furious about this.
Absolutely.
I'd also like to ask a question. I trust that you're familiar with the Constitution, and the Constitution gives the legislature the authority to make laws in this country, correct? As the elected representatives of people? You'd agree with that assessment? And would you then agree that the law set by a legislative body would trump any departmental policy of any health department out there?
Absolutely.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Burton, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just out of curiosity, do you know like what percentage of children are getting turned down where they're saying the DHS is saying that they're not exempt? Like how often does that happen?
Well, it's not that they're saying they're not exempt, but they don't want to give them the form. And then the school nurses and administration is not up to, we have to educate them as parents is what the law is, because they think that they have to have those forms stamped from the health department. The health department, I've been told, has come into schools and audited them. And then if they didn't have that stamp from the health department on that form that came from the health department, then they had to go back to the health department. When they do, they have to fill out a form anywhere from 2 pages, 5 pages long of information, which it is not in statute that they have to do anything like that to get a religious exemption.
So part of your problem is just the fact that it's kind of an inconvenient process in a lot of ways to go. You have to go to a certain place and pick up the papers and fill them out.
I wouldn't say that it's inconvenient. I would say that it's very intimidating. And for parents that don't understand the law, they have gone away and thought, well, I guess I have to get my child vaccinated because I can't get this form.
Because they don't understand, yeah.
But they don't understand.
And
if it weren't for us to help them through the process that we know the law and we know what's supposed to be done, they would possibly go and get the child vaccinated.
Yeah. Well, if they are saying that if they're choosing which religion or which status, I would agree with Representative Perkins that they really shouldn't be making that decision. If there's a religious reason, then that should be respected. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. And I would just make a comment on that just from my digging into this a little bit last year. And what I viewed it as, and you can give me your thoughts on this, but is they were arbitrarily putting more objections or more things in the way to inhibit people from doing the process that's actually in statute.
Correct.
Which is not only really unlawful, but it's completely unnecessary. I mean, they should be going strictly by what is in the statute. And it seemed to me that and it might be from your experience as well to find that that be the case, that they were just arbitrarily putting more things in the way.
Yeah, I've even heard of parents having to take classes from nurses or doctors that as long as 3-5 hours long in order to get this form, which if you have a religious objection to injecting your child, that you should never be put through anything like that.
Absolutely. Further testimony or further questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Vani, please proceed.
Sorry, awkward microphone situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to briefly make a quick statement. I think there have been some comments about the way this is being structured, this hearing is being structured, and I think that I just want to go on record and say that one of the most frustrating things about today is that we are not getting the full context of what this bill is about ahead of hearing these witnesses. I think that one of the reasons that hearings are arranged the way they are is that we can hear from the bill sponsor, we can hear the intent of the bill, we can hear what it's about, and then we hear from witnesses and ask them questions. We're not being given that opportunity today, and I'm really frustrated by that.
I would disagree somewhat with that statement in the fact that we are probably giving extra testimony here today to explain the intent and the reason why this bill is being brought forward. And I think that makes for better vetting of the legislation. So that's why we're doing this. Yes, Representative Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we will get an opportunity to question Representative Pollock.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Sander, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for the bill sponsor, maybe.
Proceed.
Thank you. Question was, what day was the bill filed? And, you know, it was not this week. It was a long time ago.
Yes, sir, it was pre-filed before session started.
I think it was available for co-sponsoring in December before we even, it was
Yes.
pre-filed, right?
Yes,
Before session started.
right.
So I
With
reviewed it then.
36 co-sponsors.
Yeah, I don't know how many pages it is, but I've reviewed it because it was an amendment last session we voted on, 20 pages, and I've reviewed it ahead of time, and then we got it submitted to the committee here. My paper says February 7th, today's the 9th, so that was like 2 days ago, and it was noticed up properly, so I don't know what.
I don't either.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Representative, are you ready to present the bill, or do you have one more witness?
I have one more witness.
Okay, thank you.
Two more, sorry.
Hi, my name is Pam Buttram. I'm a retired attorney. My background is in tax and estate planning. Is this too loud? Okay. In this bill, HB 2009, there's a provision that acknowledges that there are vaccine exemptions for religious and conscientious beliefs. Several of the states around this country, California especially, are trying to eliminate people's conscientious and religious beliefs. Now, our Constitution, Missouri's Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, states that all men and women have a natural and indefensible right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own consciences, that no human authority can control or interfere with the rights of conscience. So we have conscience and we have religious exemptions. And I'd like to point out to you, as far as conscientious objections, there are many people whose religions don't specifically exclude vaccinations, but their consciences do. I personally have a conscientious objection to receiving anything that has to do with abortion, whether it's testing or the use of fetal cells. I'm Catholic. The Pope has abandoned us and said that we should get vaccinations, and we should also not worry about aborted fetal tissue in our vaccines. So some of us have been abandoned by our religions. So there's people that are religious that their religions don't really support them on this, but we have conscientious objections. I also know people who are not religious, but it goes against their conscience to leave their families in the lurch should they take a vaccination and become disabled or dead. And then they leave their children alone in the world and dependent on the government. There's people, I'm one of these two, I have a conscientious objection to giving my children any medical procedure, submit to anything that could hurt them or kill them. So that's in this bill, and I think it really improves it considerably. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. And one last expert witness before we move into the bill sponsor explaining the bill. Please proceed.
Hi, thanks for having me. Oh, my fault. I've been waiting a long time to talk. My apologies. But anyways, my name's Rob Bazell. I'm from St. Charles. Okay, I actually showed up last year to talk about this bill, and I wasn't given the opportunity. So that's what's frustrating to me is I'm an actual citizen, but I had to sit here and listen to lobbyists talk last year. So I'd appreciate it if you looked at me while I talked. So my child, after her 1-year vaccination, it was her MMR, PCV13, and hepatitis A 2 dose. Within hours, she had her first seizure of her entire life. Within 5 days, she couldn't walk and talk. And the only reason she had the vaccines was she wasn't being let into like an early daycare or an early learning center. They said she needed her vaccines. Mom and I didn't want to do it, but we both had to work. We couldn't stay home. We had to provide for our family. And so, you know what? We got coerced into doing it for our child just to have an education. And so we had an EEG within a week, and she had 130 seizures in 30 minutes. She didn't deserve that, and she's not anyone's to sacrifice. So I get you guys can sit around and just pretend vaccine injuries don't happen, but you guys, I've been in the rooms with a lot of people in this building where you have seen vaccine inserts. We're talking about death, encephalitis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, serious things that people can be hurt by, and this is being mandated on children at that. So, you know what, I'm just disappointed, you know what I mean? My child has to live with that the rest of her life, and that it's done, it's already over with. But you guys can make a difference to make sure that doesn't happen again, because this is America. This is the greatest country in the world. So if something can kill or paralyze you, it's no one's right besides the parents to decide if that's a risk they're willing to take, and that should be reasonable in any sane world. And so just thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk today, and I just hope things change because, whether it's to keep a job or to have an education, that's a personal decision when it can possibly take your life. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Just to make sure from here on out, we don't want to respond with clapping or anything. We just need to move quickly through the hearing. Any questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Burton, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really sorry to hear that, what your family went through, what your child went through. And forgive me if I didn't hear it. What vaccine was it that you believe caused this? I'm just curious.
It was they gave her the MMR, the PCV13, and hepatitis A 2 dose. So 2 doses of it all at the same time.
And once again, I can understand how devastating that is, to correlate that together. Coming from a different perspective, can you understand what kind of world we would be in if we just didn't have those vaccines and kids? And I understand your whole thing is it should be left up to the parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can you understand what kind of world we would live in if we didn't have those vaccines?
I understand what you're saying, but the vaccine science, we need to follow the money and where it's coming from. The FDA, the CDC, the NIH, they're funded.
I understand.
No, don't cut me off. I let you talk. And, what kind of world would it be where governments and health departments can determine which children live and which don't? And what kind of world do we live in where we pretend we're all not going to have to meet our maker? And then we're going to have to tell him why, you look someone at it with a father who has a vaccine-injured child and try to tell me how great the subject is. If someone was you have a family member hurt by, say, a drug that caused them cancer, I don't think I'd be sitting on where you're at asking you, well, do you see the bright side in this? No, I don't. I don't absolutely see it, and I don't think any parent or any real person would.
Okay.
With a soul.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Further
Chair.
questions? Representative Sander, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
Question I would have for you, you're referring to the choice that you have to have a vaccine. You're not necessarily against all vaccines, but you would like to make a health choice for your child yourself.
Yeah, I would like to make that choice myself. And honestly, before we mandate vaccines, we should ask for a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study to see who's healthier across the board. It's not about being anti anything. It's just about getting down to the real science and the real data and making sure we're making the right decisions, because children's lives and people's lives are in danger, and we're seeing it. And the people, they have no liability. I mean, I couldn't sue the people that made the product that ended up causing my child to have thousands of seizures a day. That sucks, man. You know, and it is, I mean, every other product in the United States, you can sue them if they hurt you or paralyze you besides this one. And that's what this is about. It's not about the good things they do. It's the criminality that they're allowed to get away with, and I'm mad because it happened to my child.
And then another question would be, your interest is your child, but anybody else who might require a vaccine, they probably have a special interest other than your child specifically.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of money going around the whole industry, and I just encourage we can follow that money and see why we haven't done a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study for each and every vaccine. And when you combine multiple vaccines at once, that's the data I want everyone on this panel to try to get. And if they don't do that study, there's only one reason why they don't want to know that answer, because they've had 30 years to do that study. And that's there's no inert double-blind placebo in any vaccine. That's not being anti-vaccine. That's about being factual.
Thank you for being here today. Appreciate you
You're
sharing.
welcome. Yep.
Representative Banger, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to make a comment. You said that you came here last year to speak on this bill in front of, it would have been another committee. I think it was elementary and secondary education.
Yeah.
And you were not given the chance to speak.
No, ma'am.
I just want to let you know that I don't chair committees. I never will chair a committee, being in the minority party. So I don't appreciate you looking at me and making that comment. I have no control over that. And I also want to point out one other thing. My grandmother died of polio at the age of 35. I was never able to meet her, never able to know her. I guarantee you, if she would have been able to take a vaccine, she would have done it. And then she would have been here and I would have been able to know her. So I will piggyback on the other representative's comment. Vaccines are good, they're safe, they're effective. Everyone can have their own opinion, but that is my opinion.
Well, you can tell God that and tell him how my child doesn't exist in your mind. That's fine if you think that's a good thing in this world. And answer that, tell him that.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Will now Representative Pollock proceed to explain the bill, and then we will open up for public testimony, both those in favor and in opposition, and for informational purposes. Representative, please proceed.
Thank you for indulging me in a little different presentation. There is a grave need for this legislation, and I hope you've seen a little bit of that with these witnesses. Now to answer what we can do about it here today. House Bill 2009 restores parents' authority over health care decisions for their own children. It reins in the overreach of the Department of Health and Senior Services. It restores legislative oversight over vaccine mandates. The Department of Health and Senior Services with this bill will no longer be allowed to mandate vaccines by rule, and the legislature must add mandates to statute. So it's not that the politicians are oh so wise and we should make these decisions. What it does when the legislature gets to oversee all the state departments is it gives a voice to the people that we represent. It provides this area right here in a committee for the citizens of Missouri to tell us as legislators how they feel and why they feel that, and bring facts. I have doctors, I have lawyers, I have as much resources as you need to tell you that this is what they want. And the people of Missouri want this legislation. And the Department of Health and Senior Services need oversight. If a judge has to reprimand them and put it in law, then that's been done too. So this bill allows an exemption to vaccines for immunity acquired through means other than vaccinations. We've not seen that done through this entire COVID epidemic. And acquired immunity is something that's always been around, and it should have more validity in healthcare, but the reason it don't is because it doesn't make money. It would bring, 2009 would bring the statute into compliance with Article 1, Section 5 of the Missouri Constitution, which says no human authority can control or interfere with the rights of conscience by including a conscious belief objection to the religious objection verbiage. For no point in time should a person's religion be subjected to a parishioner, a pastor's signature. We've seen this gross abuse through employee vaccinations where you've had to have a clergyman sign your religious exemption. Our body autonomy and our religion, our health care, is a private matter, and it should not have to ever have someone's verification of our religious beliefs. This bill would also require that the Department of Health and Senior Services develop an informational brochure that explains exemption options. You know, it codifies the religious and conscientious exemption form. So this bill has a form in it that we could use all across the state of Missouri and eliminate work on our health departments. You know, everybody's understaffed, so this bill would make it much easier for them. Let's all use one form and have it universally accepted in the state of Missouri. It would probably reduce cost. It adds the conscientious belief objection to the religious exemption verbiage for public schools and higher learning to comply with Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution. It removes privately owned, it prevents parents' decision not to vaccinate their children from being used as a contributing factor to child neglect or abuse charges. And finally, 2009, doctors cannot be punished by the State Board of Registration for the Healing Arts for issuing medical exemptions to mandated vaccines. I talked to a doctor yesterday that said his medical exemptions were thrown out and not used during this pandemic. And he has lost his job, and we know of several medical providers and medical workers that have lost their job over this. So I hope you see today the importance of House Bill 2009.
Any questions for the bill sponsor? Yes, Representative Burton, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, you know, the more that I'm thinking about this, it is just so disappointing when we're hearing expert witnesses, so-called expert witnesses, that even said themselves they're not an expert.
I should have used special witness, sorry.
If you think that the people of Missouri want a bill like this to go through, then why don't you go out and collect the signatures? Why don't you use the initiative petition process, collect those signatures, put it on the ballot?
Because they already elected me to be here.
And let
so
them
that's
vote
why I'm doing my job.
Like they did on Medicaid expansion, which they did vote for, and I'm sure you voted down to fully fund Medicaid.
Sir, I work in the medical field for 26 years. I've seen the abuses of the Medicaid system. Should people be able to call 911 to get an ambulance ride to the emergency room so they can go to Walmart?
Medicaid expansion? Did the people vote for Medicaid expansion?
Let's keep the comments.
I follow the will of the people.
I do too. That's
in the Philippines, confidence in the importance of vaccines plummeted from near 93% in 2015 to 32% in 2018 among suspicions that a new fever vaccine was causing severe complications. The number of measles cases in the country increased more than 8 times from 2,407 to 22,787 between 2017 and 2018. Those are facts.
Sir, did you look at the VARS report and see the rate of deaths?
Representative, just one moment. Yes, Representative Van Schooy. Let's keep our questions to the bill sponsor.
I was sharing facts.
That's
Further-
my job right now.
Further questions for this witness, or for the bill sponsor? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. Yes, Representative Perkins.
Thank you. Yes, lady, thank you for thank you for bringing this. I'm from Missouri, and I would like to see it come here. So,
Me too.
what did you do for a living prior to coming here?
I'm a registered cardiovascular invasive specialist.
So you're
Work in the
medical
cardiac
professional?
cath lab,
Yeah, very.
assist physicians.
And I've spoken to many people in this room, and I'm going to question you and see if your findings are the same.
Sure.
I've spoken to many people in this room. I've found none of them to be anti-vaccination,
No.
but rather to be anti-mandate. Is that your findings as well?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative. I just would like to say I appreciate you working on this bill. This is something that's important to me for both personal reasons and for policy reasons. I think there are problems that need to be addressed in this. I've always been an advocate for a conscientious ability to have a conscientious objection when it comes to vaccines. So I appreciate you working hard on this, and we'll hear some more testimony here. So we're going to move into testimony, public testimony for the bill, and we're going to alternate those in favor and those in opposition, and we're going to limit to 2 minutes. Please proceed.
Hello, I am Gail Griswold. I am the president of Camdenton School Board, and if the committee would understand, that's a nonpartisan election, and so it's pretty disappointing that the minority group has taken their ball and gone home. I just want to put that on the record. That being said, I have personal experience of dealing with the DHS and the local health department. In April 12, 2001, I took my seat as the president of the school board, and I'm going to get probably a little emotional. And we voted that day to get rid of all COVID protocols. No masking, no contact tracing, no secondary quarantine. We're almost a year into doing absolutely nothing. We have 4,000 students and over 600 staff members. We're one of the largest rural schools in Missouri. We are 75% self-funded with a $55 million budget. We're not small potatoes, but we pretend to be, so we aren't, deal with all the things coming from here. But anyway, so I need to hurry. So that being said, we went in, so we did find 0 cases. Our hospital had 0 cases. Everybody moves on, and we have fun at the Lake of the Ozarks, like everyone knows that we like to do. And I get an email from our local health department that says, here's our COVID recommendation plan, and by the way, you have to put masks on your transportation buses per CDC order. And I responded back, thank you for your recommendations. The CDC has no authority on my buses in my school district. Until this day, this is where I get worked up. I hear little rural schools that are still putting masks on their transportation buses because they think they have to. If you follow the CDC rental moratorium, that set precedent that the CDC has no authority, and for this Public Health Act, all they have authority for is pesticides and stuff. They don't have authority. So I hope you go back to your districts and let all your school board members know that they do not legally have to follow that. Because who's been knocking on my school's door? Anybody? The health department never responded to my email because they know us. We have enough money to sue the DHS, and we will. And until you guys rein them in, I will be up here every day asking you to rein them in. They have bullied local health departments and scared. One of our directors told me she was on antidepressants because of all of that. They're threatened with lawsuits. They say that we're going to get lawsuits. And I'm tired of the DHS bullying local health departments to force them to commandeer us to do their dirty work. And it won't happen in my school district. It's not happening in my school district. And we didn't take the ESSER 3 money. We turned down $8 million of ESSER money. Because what that person's, I don't know who it was, it's true. I was disgusted that you can incentivize young children that are vaccinated and enter them in a lottery for a gift card. I can't believe the state even applied for that. And DESE needs to be reined in too.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
That's
your
okay.
time is
I
expired.
know.
Thank
I have
you.
a lot to say.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We will now take testimony in opposition. Anyone here? Please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Garrett Webb, registered lobbyist for the Missouri chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I think it's important that we take a step back and remember that we're not talking about the COVID vaccine when we're looking at this legislation. We're talking about childhood vaccinations that have been around for decades now and that have proven effective at saving lives. When we look at this, I want to talk about the cost of containment of outbreaks. A few years ago, there was an outbreak of mumps that occurred at the University of Missouri. Over 300 cases, almost 400 cases. It cost the state almost $1 million for that containment. There was an outbreak of measles among an unpopulated community at a daycare center in Jackson County a few years ago that cost over $300,000 to contain. The costs of these to the state are enormous and are preventable by vaccinations. We have spent years doing research, doing studies, making sure that the vaccines that are being prescribed, that are being recommended, that children have in order to stay safe are what's best for all children. Some of you, including you, Mr. Chairman, have listened to me say this for many years now in these committee hearings, and I will continue to do so. This is about the safety of all children, those who are immunocompromised, those who may not be able to take a vaccination because they're undergoing a medical treatment that precludes them from it. This is not about one child or one family or a small number of families that think that it's unfair that they're not able to be vaccinated or that they're not able to send their child to school if their child is not vaccinated. I know you'll have a lot of questions, so I'll just go ahead and close there.
Thank you for your testimony. I would say that it just in response to your statement there, it does become about one child if it's your child. Further questions for this witness? Yes, Representative Sander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First thought or question for you would be, can you define what a vaccine is in 2022, or is it different than it was before COVID?
Well, again, we're not talking about the COVID vaccination with this legislation. If you read this bill, which I know you said you had, this legislation does not mention the COVID vaccine. This legislation pertains to already existing childhood vaccinations that have been in place for decades and continue to be proven effective at saving lives and protecting all children.
So are you saying that the COVID vaccine is not a vaccine? Or
I did not say that at all. I said the legislation, which keeps being brought up in relation to the COVID vaccine, does not relate to that whatsoever. If the bill sponsor had wanted this to be about the COVID vaccine, she would have included that in the language.
So it lists mumps, hepatitis B, rubella, diphtheria, a couple other ones, tetanus. Those are what I would think of as a vaccine, but is the way a shot that is used to immunize against COVID, is that a vaccine?
Of course it's a vaccine. However,
all the brand, there's different brands of it, but
I'm not sure what the question is, Representative.
Thank you.
Representative Vosco, please proceed.
Thank you. So you make a point of saying that this bill, I don't know your exact words, but you're referencing the existing vaccination requirements that we've been doing for years. This bill seems to go out of its way to actually maintain that. We've got a list here of the various different requirements. It specifically says that those are still requirements on public schools. It seems to me that the bulk of what this bill does is remove those requirements from private institutions, which we really have no authority over to begin with in this area, and specifically gives the legislature the authority to add or remove from that list. I haven't heard the bill sponsor or any of the witnesses so far advocate that we modify the list of vaccinations that are currently required. They're simply saying, A, it should be the legislature who makes that determination and not, unelected bureaucrats. And then B, if someone has a exemption that current law already allows for, there ought to be a streamlined process that we can trust is going to be applied fairly to allow people to get that. I'm not sure what your objection to this bill is.
Well, a number of objections, but I lost track of the number of people who've testified as quote-unquote experts or whatever they've called themselves as. But they've all mentioned COVID, or I think most of them have in some capacity or another, and their belief that the Department of Health and Senior Services and DESE have overreached, and that's an argument that I think is separate from the underlying factor here, which is that we're talking about childhood vaccinations that have been proven effective at saving lives. And while you said this doesn't change in any way that those are required, the language that has been used in this hearing so far has been primarily, in my opinion, about the COVID vaccine. And so I wanted to clear that we're talking about childhood vaccinations, not the COVID vaccine.
Sure. I guess my point is your testimony is against the other witnesses, not this bill. I want to know what your objection to this specific bill is.
I have a number of objections to this bill, including the fact that if we make it just so that anyone who wants to can have an objection to a vaccine in order to enroll their child in school, how are you to say that that's not just maybe a parent or a guardian who doesn't want to get their child vaccinated, and so they use that as a reasoning for not doing so? How are you to say that a child that's not vaccinated going to school with the potential to carry a condition of some sort, like measles or something that they've been exposed to, and they take that and expose an immunocompromised child or adult within that school building? That's what we're talking about here, is that children all together, for their health and well-being, the most effective means of ensuring that they become productive members of society and grow and thrive, as we've seen over decades of vaccines, is to use them.
So just to make sure we're on the same page, then your organization opposes the existing exemption process then and would prefer everyone be required, period?
That is not what I said at all. I said that we have a process in place and we have vaccines for a reason. And the reason is that they save lives, and there are certain exemptions which are allowed, and that those exemptions should be in rare circumstances, that they are used as applicable under the law.
So religious exemptions you believe should be rare?
I'm not saying what I believe, I'm saying what the law states, which is that there are allowable exemptions for religious and medical reasons. And if you're a member of a religion that qualifies for one of those, then of course that should be respected.
So those people who don't find themselves religious, they don't get to have sincerely held beliefs that the law should protect?
I did not say that.
Well, that would be the corollary to your statement, though. If the existing law says that there are recognized religious exemptions, this bill opens up that language to allow for conscientious objections absent a religious belief. If you're against that change but are not lobbying for the removal of the existing exemptions, what more could I conclude? That you simply don't believe that people who are not religious ought to be able to make that decision?
Well, I think that the religious question is certainly something very personal and very near and dear to people's hearts, whether they choose to be a religious person or not. And that if their religion is one of those that legally is recognized as exemptable under the vaccine legislation that we have, then it's acceptable.
So you believe the government should be determining which religions are acceptable and which ones are not? That seems perhaps a road we do not wish to travel, sir.
I completely agree with you, so I don't think we should.
All right. Well, thank you for your testimony.
Further questions? Representative Perkins, please proceed.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time. A question regarding those pre-existing vaccines that have been around for years and years. For example, perhaps the polio vaccine, which did remarkable things in the first part and middle of the 20th century, correct? And I got those vaccines as a child. If I, now that I've received those vaccines, were to be come in close contact with someone who had polio from a different country, where it's not completely wiped out yet, would I contract polio from that person?
I'm not 100% certain that you would be 100% guaranteed with any vaccination,
right?
Including the polio vaccination. But the odds are extremely higher that if you are a vaccinated individual, you're not going to contract that disease.
Right. Now, I think that most Americans feel very comfortable that if they received a polio vaccine and they came in contact with someone with polio, they probably would not get that. I don't know that most Americans feel that way with the current COVID ones that are available. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been debating whether I tell this group this or not. I got the COVID vaccine because it was my decision for myself and not for anyone else, correct? After receiving that, I also then got COVID. And so it just doesn't, it doesn't seem to have the same effectiveness that so many of those time-tested ones that have been around forever do. With that being said, I actually ultimately believe that it's probably the parents' decision on all those things, but I do appreciate you coming here today. So.
Further questions? Yes, Representative Van please proceed.
Inquire. Gentlemen, the laws that we have now that require vaccinations for the listed ailments here, poliomyelitis, rubella, rubeola, mumps, tetanus, pertussis, diphtheria, hepatitis B. What laws are those that require those?
Those are the statutes that are existing under the public health laws for school-required vaccinations.
They're state laws, is that correct?
Correct.
Right, they're not federal laws, is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct. All of the vaccination mandates were done state by state. There's no federal law that mandates these vaccinations, is that correct?
As far as I know, that is correct.
And our job is to what?
To
make state law?
Correct.
Thank you.
Further questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in favor of the bill, please come forward. We're going to have to move to 1 minute testimony. I hate to do
Mr.
that,
Chairman?
but in order to hear everyone. Yes.
Just would like to put on record, since some of our colleagues have decided to storm out, I'm getting ready to leave, but I'm not storming out. I have another committee hearing that I have to partake in, and so if you'll please excuse me, sir.
Thanks for the heads up, gentlemen. Yes, please proceed.
Good afternoon. My name is Megan Guillen. I wanted to show you all something. I'm not going to show it to you because it has personal information on it. DHSS and the health departments have been telling people that their information is protected. It's not. In one county here in Missouri, someone, Sunshine, requested exemption holders, and a judge awarded the list. DHSS and the health departments cannot be trusted with this information. The questionnaire forms that people have been talking about that people have to fill out in exchange for the exemption form, the exemption form is being held hostage from the parent unless they give over their data. And they were not able to protect that information. So anytime they try to tell you that this information is protected, it's not. A judge awarded the list to someone that Sunshine requested it, and they gave it to me. It's 5 pages just from one county. I do want to mention too, one of the lobbyists mentioned that the mumps outbreak, they were talking about a mumps outbreak. You might want to check into the MU mumps outbreak. It was 100% vaccinated that had the mumps. Also, I think they were with the American Academy of Pediatrics. Is that correct? Was the previous lobbyist with AAP? Okay, 2018 or 2019, the AAP made a statement they wanted to get rid of all non-medical exemptions. That'd be conscientious and religious.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Representative Perkins, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. Why are we keeping a list?
Well, there is actually a CDC grant that has been granted here in Missouri to study exemptions. Exemptions have not been studied in the state of Missouri. It's called Missouri Immunization Coalition. It's a nonprofit. It's affiliated. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's affiliated with MU, and they are studying exemptions. So when I heard about the questionnaire a long time ago, I assumed that it was for the purpose of studying, because they ask demographics, they want your address, they want to know who is your doctor, which that's alarming for some parents because we want to protect our doctors. They want to know why you are not vaccinating or why you're delaying. So, there is a study going on currently. So I'm guessing that is why they're collecting it. I also, you all have a blue folder. It has a transcript between a parent and the Bureau of Immunizations in there. And the Bureau of Immunizations lady stated explicitly that it is my job to track non-immunized children. That was in 2019. If you can read that, it's in your folder. And there's also, each one of you should have at least one story from maybe the county you represent or something in your region that would show what some of the parents have been dealing with.
Further questions for this witness? Thank you. If we can connect online, I do have some questions for you in regards to that sunshine request and that judge issuing that.
Okay.
Thank you. Next witness in opposition to House Bill 2009. Just as a reminder, please make sure you have your witness form filled out and proceed when ready, sir.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Alex Hover. I'm a physician, and I'm wearing the mask really out of courtesy because I still see patients with COVID, even though I'm fully immunized. I am a Missouri physician, have been since I graduated here in 1976. I've practiced now 45 years, except for the time that I was out of state in the United States Air Force in the 70s and 80s. And I speak about the difficulty that you have. I understand balancing personal freedoms, which are very important, and terrible stories about vaccine injuries. That does happen. But I have 45 years of experience in practice, and I have seen the evolution of times when we have eliminated or nearly eliminated preventable childhood illnesses. When I served in the Air Force and stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, that was a big training center. Thousands of airmen basics would come in there to receive their training. They would be there during the 6 weeks. And in that 6 weeks, there was a pool of non-immunized airmen basics who came from various parts of the country who would then acquire and maintain a pool of common childhood preventable illnesses. Rubeola was the one that, when we had to admit him to the hospital, about 600 a year or so, measles, encephalitis, and complications from that really were reasons for us to admit those, and they were preventable. As a result of that experience, we did begin to immunize and help to nearly eliminate one of the last big pools of rubeola.
I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but I think your time has expired.
All right.
Do we have any questions for this witness? Representative Sander, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question I had was, what vaccine out of all vaccines has the most vaccine injuries?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you.
I think it was COVID, but by far.
In response to that, I'm glad you asked that question because the VAERS, the public reporting as well as
yeah, that's
physician
what I'm getting my
reporting.
info from, the VAERS report.
Yeah, that is unevaluated except for deaths and serious injuries with that. So you have to bear that in mind. I will tell you that, and I appreciate Representative Perkins, that unfortunately you got COVID after the vaccine. That certainly does happen. The vaccines are not as effective in preventing the illness necessarily, but they do prevent still over 90% of hospitalizations and serious illnesses. At our hospitals in Springfield, Missouri, more than 90% of the people hospitalized are those who are not vaccinated.
I have a couple more questions if I could continue with those. The VAERS reporting system shows a lot of vaccine injuries with COVID compared to any other vaccine is what I've researched. But do you know, without a vaccine, where are most COVID deaths, injuries, hospitalizations? Are they among children or adults?
No, they're among adults and the immunocompromised.
why, in your medical opinion, would we want to vaccinate immunized children with the COVID vaccine whenever their hospitalizations are very low, but their vaccine injuries are higher than if they would get COVID and have natural immunity?
While I am not a vaccine expert, and I hope that you'll be able to hear some, I will tell you that the estimates are being able to save thousands of hospitalizations for children, to be able to survive the initial bout of COVID. It's better to be vaccinated and hopefully get natural immunity on top of that as well, because you didn't die and weren't hospitalized.
I have one more question. Well, maybe it's a topic, but the COVID vaccine has mRNA technology to make the vaccine with Moderna. And the last week, I just researched more about vaccines. There's a HIV vaccine with the same mRNA technology that is from Moderna. Would you encourage everyone to get an HIV vaccine made similar to COVID?
I can only answer you that the messenger RNA technology that has been used, and I am not a researcher, but that information was publicly available that was presented to the subcommittee for the FDA that looked at both of those vaccines for Moderna and for Pfizer, had nearly 30,000 individuals in the phase 3 studies, I believe, somewhere around there. So they have been extensively studied.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Representative Perkins, please proceed.
Thank you.
Gentlemen,
Doctor,
I think there's
Doctor,
a further question here.
Doctor. Yes. Thank you for coming, and I appreciate your service to the country. Over the course of your career, do you know, has the very definition of what makes something a vaccine, has it changed over the course of your career?
No, it still deals with biologic material that's used to immunize somebody against an infection that they may then hopefully have a less severe course or prevent it altogether.
Okay. So, because it just seems to me like, growing up, right, that the idea of having a vaccine meant that you would no longer get a disease. That's what that's kind of how it was implied to me as a child, right?
Yes.
Is that a pretty common held belief during the, say, 1980s?
Oh, yes, I would think so. I think it's less so now.
Right.
But.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Lovasco, please proceed.
Thank you. So we didn't get quite into your objections with the particular bill. I guess for starters, I should ask, do you take issue at all with any of the existing laws in regards to vaccination exemptions or the like?
Certainly, religious exemptions should be and have been, to my knowledge, always acknowledged and respected. I understand you have a difficult time balancing that and increased request for exemptions and conscientious objections. However, that has to be balanced against the public health aspect of this, in which children all dwell in the same community, and even if they don't go to the same school, they do mix.
Sure. And I think that's part of what I'd like to explore, and as a physician, I'd like to kind of like to weigh in on that a little bit. I'm not a doctor, I'm a salesman. It seems like what we've kind of heard touched on the negative testimony here is this kind of concept that's not stated directly that, well, if we give people a choice, then too many people will choose not to do it, and as a result, there will be harder to control outbreaks, that you'll have more people spreading these diseases. That seems to be what's being implied. Would you say that's a fair statement?
And I believe that's certainly one concern that people have. I don't know what % of people reject or ask to be exempted from immunizations.
I guess what I'm asking is your personal concern, at least, that if we expand the eligibility of these exemptions, that will reduce the number of folks getting vaccinated, or children specifically, to a troublesome level in your mind?
Yes, I would have that concern.
So I guess if you are at least on principle okay with the existing exemption process. And the issue here is that, well, if we expand that even a little bit, that might ultimately, open the dam and make it so that we were in an unrecoverable situation. Well, I'm not a doctor, I am a salesman, and that makes me wonder if the issue is either with the product being sold or the sales pitch being provided, not the customer. If enough parents are ultimately opting their kids out of this, you have to ask yourself, well, why? Is that because the government or the health departments or whomever are not doing a good enough job explaining the benefits? Is it because the product itself is really not that great? We should be exploring those topics, in my mind, rather than defaulting to, well, let's just make it very difficult or uncomfortable for people to make that decision, and then we'll just default to everyone does it. I don't think that that's a good way to get either confidence in the product or service here, or achieve the result that you're ostensibly after, which is a higher vaccination rate. Would you think that it would be positive from a public health perspective if we offered people expanded choice and they looked at the options and they said, yeah, we're still going to make that choice? Wouldn't that ultimately mean more success for the efforts to get people vaccinated?
The way you've worded it, absolutely yes. I agree with you that I'm at a loss, truthfully, over 45 years to understand the resistance, or I shouldn't say resistance, the concerns and lack of confidence. I've never experienced this before, and clearly some of the messaging, I think personally, the CDC messaging has been sometimes confusing and has lent itself to that. We have not done as well as we should have to be able to present the information on the vaccines and have people feel comfortable. And I understand why there is a room full of people who are very uncomfortable and very concerned about their personal rights. You are correct. We really need to address that so that people can feel more comfortable and confident about the vaccines, which I personally feel, and I'm staying as abreast of this as I can as an internist, that they are well measured and that they are safe and effective in preventing serious illness, hospitalizations, and death.
Well, and I think I would argue that's a vote in confidence of this bill, because I would think that the vast majority of people who currently get their children vaccinated at the moment are doing so because they believe it's the right choice for them, not because they were being forced into it. So why fight to the death to keep the people who want to make that choice from opting out when we can let them do their own thing and win anyway? That just gives us that much more confidence that this is a safe and effective product. And I think that's true regardless of what vaccination we're talking about. The more we can demonstrate that people are choosing these things and are not being arm twisted into doing it, well, it seems to me that's the best sales pitch that you can have.
I would agree with that.
I think you should support this bill then. Thanks, sir.
But no, thank you. Appreciate it.
One more question, gentlemen. I'm sorry. So there's 15 other states that have philosophical objections when it comes to vaccines. Do you see any other problems and outbreaks or anything in those other states, any of those other states?
I don't know the states you're talking about and don't have an answer for that. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further testimony in favor of the bill, please come forward.
Hi, I'm Julie Thomas. This is the COVID dashboard for Cheyenne Regional Medical in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Total hospitalizations as of February 7th. 19 fully vaccinated. 4 fully vaccinated in the ICU. 0 anybody else. On a ventilator, 1 fully vaccinated. 0 anyone else. 1 up to date on vaccinations also died. And then 1 fully vaccinated died. 1 not non-vaccinated died. There are 400,000 medical malpractice deaths every year in a hospital. Did you know that? My grandmother died at Mizzou at 59 years old. They called all of my aunts and uncles in to make sure we weren't suing the hospital. True story. My grandfather died at Cap Region because of a hernia surgery, and the doctor crossed his medications. I just finished, my niece had 2 years of chemo. She's 8 years old. My sister had bone cancer at 25 years old. I know what it is to fear disease, and I know what it is to need medicine. Our founders dealt with smallpox. They did not mandate vaccines. They had the plague. We had inoculations during the Revolutionary War. That was something that existed. People died from inoculations during the Revolutionary War. I have twin boys that are identical. They're 20 years old. They were never vaccinated. And it wasn't because I was anti-vaccine. It was because twin boys had the highest incident for autism. We have 1 in 36 boys with autism now. What are we trading here? We also had polio. They switched it. It used to be live. Now it's dead. There are 9 patents that Dr. Malone has on mRNA. He has 9 patents on it, and he has said, stop the COVID vaccine. He took it, he gave it to his patients, and he said it's biologically active. That's all.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions?
Want to question me?
I don't think there are any.
It's called, there are no questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Also, I have 2 friends that just were in Hawaii.
I'm sorry, but your time
You didn't
is
have any
expired.
questions? You want to hear about them? Because they're nurses. And one of them left a testimony here. They both got COVID at the same time. One fully vaccinated and boosted. The other refuses.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You can also submit that online as well. Next witness in opposition to the bill.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, David Winton, I'll try and be respectful and quick about this. And first, let me just tell you, I'm here representing Children's Hospital in St. Louis, as well as Kids Win Missouri, which is a kind of a nonprofit group that's a child welfare group. So this is really hard, and I think the issue really is the balance of public policy, right? So the idea in current statute is, before a kid, I've got 2 boys, one of them's 25 years old, the other one's 19, and before you can go to a daycare or you can go to a school, you get this little postcard in the mail. Most of us got that for our kids and says, hey, don't forget, before your kid shows up for daycare or school, you got to get this vaccine. You got to show proof that you got that vaccine. And I, like most other parents who are busy working with their kids, saw that card and said, oh boy, I better get my kid a vaccine, right? It didn't even dawn on me, and they go to the doctor. I'm sure the doctor told me lots of times that I was supposed to do these things. And so I got the child vaccinated, right? I didn't have any kind of exemption. The law recognizes today a religious exemption, as you all have pointed out. And what that does is it reminds every parent, in order to go to school, you got to have a vaccine. And what that does is it provides a layer of protection over everybody. So for the people that don't want to get the vaccine for a religious purpose, fair enough. Then we have this layer of protection for those folks. What this bill does is, and what our objection to this bill does, is it takes away that requirement for all but public daycares, which I'm not exactly sure exactly what a public daycare is, in public schools. So it weakens that layer. So that means that those folks cannot require a requirement for this. That's what this bill does. It does a lot of other things around meningitis. It does. It's in the first section, and it takes away their ability.
I hate to
It takes away the mandate. I apologize. It takes away the mandate.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, Representative Bosco, please proceed.
Yeah, well, I was going to correct you there, but you figured it out that there is a difference between us saying that, if a private business wanted to. So let's explore that a little bit, since we haven't talked about that a whole lot. I don't have this number, but you might. What percentage of children in Missouri roughly go to private schools versus public schools? You know?
I actually do not have that answer.
I don't either. I didn't think to bring it up ahead of time, but I venture to say it's probably going to be in the minority. Would you agree?
I would assume most kids go to public schools, and I would assume that's significant, although I will say with daycare, that's unclear to me, because I don't know what a public daycare actually is, other than being in a public facility.
I think it's a reasonable criticism that we maybe should define that a little bit more in the bill. I would agree with that. I like to have nice, clear definitions that we don't have unnecessary lawsuits. But when it comes to let's say private daycare, well, I'll define a private daycare that I think we could probably agree. Let's say somebody is watching their neighbor's kids in their own home, right? So we're not talking a retail storefront. It's that's allowed under law. There's some regulations there. In that case, we're talking about making a requirement on under current law on private people in their own homes, possibly. That seems like a bit of an overreach.
I just want to check, because that they would generally be an unlicensed daycare. So like if my wife opens up a daycare, or I open up a daycare and I watch 3 unrelated kids, that's unlicensed, and I'm not smart enough to be able to tell you that's covered in this.
Mr. Wynn, can I ask you to move closer to the mic for the cameras? Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding, I think there's a threshold of the number of children at which point you have to be licensed, but they can still do it out of the house up to another threshold. There's a whole formula there, but larger picture here. One of the big selling points in my mind of this bill is that it takes the state out of regulating how people are using their own private property and who they allow on their property and who they don't. That comes up quite a bit when we talk about the COVID things, but this is all dealing with existing vaccination requirements that long predate COVID. And it seems to me, and you correct me if maybe you feel differently, but if a private organization wants to say, well, we're only going to take children in who are vaccinated, if they want to make that decision, that's their business. But if they also want to say, hey, you know what, we're only going to take kids that are not vaccinated, isn't that also their choice? And certainly when we're talking about a public health matter, and as you point out, statistics over a large population, we're talking about a pretty small fraction of the population, not only that would be, not vaccinated, in general, but on top of that, congregating in similar locations. In any one particular daycare or private school, the percentage is going to be pretty low just based on the distribution of people throughout the state. How is it that these changes would be significant enough in your mind that would somehow open us up to the mass spread of disease? Because I'm not seeing that.
So let me just preface this by telling you I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't have some skill level that tells me I can tell you at 84% everybody has got herd immunity or any of these things, right? So I'm going to try and just answer your question from a layman's perspective, because I think that's the way you're intending the question. So first of all, there is a right to control your own property. I believe that. I believe this legislature believes that. There's also a duty of the legislature when it comes to, in government, when it comes to the safety and the public welfare, to intervene in times. And that's essentially what you're balancing. And so if I could rephrase your question, I think your question really is the benefit of the state intervening in this case and requiring all of those institutions to have a mandate for vaccines, does that benefit outweigh the reduction to the personal liberties that organization has? And I think that's essentially where you're going, because we do this every day, right? I don't have a personal liberty to drive 112 miles on the road, because that could endanger somebody else. So the state has a compelling interest to make a law that says I can't do that. And these are absolutely state laws. I believe the answer to that is yes. I believe that this is the greatest country in the world, that has the greatest science in the world, that has adapted things and made our children safer than our parents were, and we were, and our grandparents and the great-grandparents before us. And that's one of the benefits. And I absolutely believe that people have the right to rely on their religion to make those decisions, and the state, in their wisdom, enshrine that in the statute. I'm not sure, when we start talking about additional pieces, like I have a lot of beliefs about my ability to do things, or my belief that maybe that's not the best thing. But there's a compelling reason why I should comply with the laws as well. And so I think that's a decision you all have to make, and I respect it. But I don't agree in this case that the reduction of my liberty, if I'm going to open up a private daycare, is such that it outweighs the benefit of saying to me, if that's the business I'm going to be in, I have to also respect the fact the state has a statute that says I'm going to make sure anybody who walks through my door when they start has got a vaccination.
Okay. And then final question, why daycares and private schools specifically? Why would we draw the line there? There's plenty of kids' birthday parties that have just as many kids as a daycare. We don't tell parents that, you can't have Timmy's friends come over unless they're vaccinated.
It's an instrument.
What changes that in your mind as far as where that line is?
It's an instrument of policy. It is a mechanism by which we ensure that virtually all children, I say virtually, right, because there are exceptions, it is a mechanism that this legislature years ago saw fit to ensure, and other states do as well, to make sure that all children, or virtually all children, have an immunization. Because every single kid is required to go to school. Not every kid is required to go to daycare, and I would assume, although I wasn't here, I've been here for a long time, I wasn't here at the time when they did this, I would assume that they included daycare because that would get kids at an earlier time. That's what I would assume. But I think, that's why we wouldn't require a parent to make sure the kid's immunized, because every kid's got to go to school.
I think our Constitution might provide some kind of constitutional rights in regards to public education as well. I think my public school friends will tell me that regularly when I'm criticizing the public schools. But I appreciate your testimony, sir. Thank you.
Representative Perkins.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Whitten, for being here. Do your clients have any objection to the religious or conscientious exemptions?
The exemption is really tough. The religious exemption, no. We don't have any issue. You can define that. Like, we've had this conversation now. We're going to have this discussion on the COVID vaccine mandate. We're going to have this discussion on lots and lots of things, right? In fact, I just had this discussion with my 25-year-old son who said, I go to Wake Forest and I'm not getting the COVID vaccine. And of course, as parents who believe in it, we begged him to do it because he's our kid and we love him and we want him to get vaccinated and we think that's the right thing to do. As somebody who happens to be of the Jewish faith, I looked at him and said, you can't claim a religious exemption because we don't have one. It is not in our religion. And by doing that, it's disingenuous to all the other people that claim it based on a clearly held religious exemption. When we get into conscientious exemptions, we are now getting into a world where everybody gets to make their own rules. And the truth is, we live in a world of rules. And I understand your point, Representative Lovasco, completely. It is a point that's been made over and over again to me. And some days I just feel like, well, maybe I'm just wrong. Okay, so... But I believe that the religious exemption is justified because we are a nation of laws that also respects the individual liberties that people have based on their religion. I don't know that we have that exactly for what my feeling is or my belief is outside of that structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I would just add to that, Mr. Winton, I would tend to disagree. I think that the right of conscience is just as, if not more important than the right to religious freedom. And I think that's what this all boils down to, is what is our liberty and freedom of conscience. And I think what we have in place is unacceptable because, what you have is the state compelling people with penalty of law to violate their conscience.
Yes, sir.
And that, to me, goes against everything that we believe about liberty in this country. And I think it's even further, it's causing what I would call moral injury with people because, and that's a whole different subject we could talk about later. But I think that's what all this boils down to with the bill and what the bill sponsor is trying to. But I appreciate your opinion. So,
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And I want you to know that our clients, and as I do, appreciate the positions and the opinions of everybody in this room, and especially of you all in this committee. And I appreciate the opportunity to be heard.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Next witness in favor of the bill. Just real quick before you start, how many are left to testify in favor of the bill? 1, 2, okay, we're almost there. How many in opposition? 3, 4, 5. How many for informational purposes? Okay. All right, we'll keep going with 1 minute, and please proceed.
Hello, my name is Sarah Ann Denson. My son Samuel Denson had 2 direct injuries with vaccines and 1 issue that was entangled with vaccines. I'm not going to go into his whole health history because that would be 15 years of your time, and you don't have that much time. Basically, my son had underlying issues, and for 10 years, nobody could figure out what those were, so they just kept vaccinating. And I had no power as a parent to say, why don't we figure out what's going on before we keep doing this? The day my doctor told me that my son would be on antivirals the rest of his life, my husband took our dog to the vet for a minor extraction of a broken claw. That night, as I sat in tears over my son's issues, we got a phone call. It was our vet calling to check on our dog's hangnail. That night, as I sat in, she was worried about our dog and cared enough to check in and make sure she answered any questions I might have. A few years later, when our dog had a reaction to a vaccine, our vet didn't deny any connections. She not only knew how to stop the reaction, but she immediately investigated the underlying issues. She came up with a battle plan of health care so that our dog could safely get future vaccines.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your time has expired. Thank you so much. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition to the bill.
My name is Suzanne Opperman. I've been a nurse, registered nurse for 45 years. I come from first-generation American, so my perspective is looking at the rest of the world, not just the United States. In the rest of the world currently, I'm going to just focus right now on measles as an example, because I can't cover all of them. Measles between 2016 and 2019 rose 50%, according to the World Health Organization, around the world. It is everywhere else. Those people are coming here. The highest care load, it was the highest care load in 23 years, 207,500 deaths in 2019 worldwide because of measles. The World Health Organization set a goal for around the world to have at least 5 out of 6 countries to have what we had by 2020 of not having measles in their country. They're not making it. Only one country has done it in 2000, and we don't have that anymore.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but your time has expired.
No problem.
Questions? Yes, Representative Perkins.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm going to go like a completely different direction and ask a question to you.
I don't know.
Who within the governmental structure has the right to deny a religious exemption?
That is not my field of expertise at all.
All right, thank you very much.
Further questions? Seeing none. Next witness in favor of the bill, please come forward. Yes.
Hi, my name is Michelle Smith. I want to speak in favor of the bill. We've been talking about COVID, and the question was, why is COVID coming up? RSMO Chapter 167, 181 gives DHSS the authority to add vaccines to the schedule. It's not in the legislature's hands. That's why we want the legislature to have that oversight, so they can add COVID at any time. The comments today about ages 5 to 11 being coerced, some have said, and incentivized to get the vaccine, that is evidence that it's perhaps that the COVID vaccine will be the next thing that they add to that list. And I also want to say the DHSS has a proposed amendment. We're under an emergency rule right now, and there's a proposed amendment that would add this to the Title 19, Division 20, Chapter 20, CSR 2020-20. All testing results from COVID-19, whether negative or positive, shall be reported to the Department of Health and Senior Services, and this includes in schools. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none. Next witness in opposition to the bill. Just to remind everyone, make sure you fill out a witness form and turn that in so that we have record of that. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Lucas. I'm the director of the Missouri Nurses Association, and I'm here to speak in opposition of this bill. You've heard a lot of testimony today. You don't need to hear much more from me, but the nurses are here to validate the safe and effectiveness of the childhood vaccines that are listed in this bill. So we are in opposition to this today. Thank you very much, and I'll take any questions.
Yes, Representative Perkins.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and thank you for keeping it short. Real quick question. Who knows better what's best for children, the Nurses Association or parents? It's a lose-lose question, isn't it?
It very much is a lose-lose question. So,
But
you know,
you understand the point, though.
I do very much understand the point. You know, we very much believe in the fact of looking at the greater good, right? These vaccines have been around for a long time. The science shows us that they are safe and effective. I hear the stories that were being told today, and I feel very much for the families that we're talking. I really, really do. But, you know, when we're looking at the greater good of everybody, you know, we have to follow what the science is showing us, and the science is showing us that the vaccines are safe and effective.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I would also like to point out that, or ask the question, I guess. Do you know of any other nurses that are in favor of the bill?
Individually in favor of the bill? You know, our nurses run the gamut of everybody, so I'm sure there are nurses who are in favor of it, but we as the association, which looks at the vast majority of nurses who are within our membership, as well as looking nationally at the numbers, they would be against this bill.
Sure. Because I know there's several nurses that are in this room that are in favor of the bill, especially the bill sponsor. So thank you for your testimony. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness in favor of the bill. Please come forward.
I'm Cindy Jones from Crawford County. I'll make this very brief. This bill is remarkable in one sense that it identifies a number of problems with the current scheme, and it identifies a number of solutions. As a legislator, I think you probably all are interested in getting solutions instead of complaints. You probably get a lot of complaints and constituents telling you of problems, and you're left to find solutions. This bill is full of solutions. The things that have come out of testimony today from a 30,000-foot level, we need to bring our statutes and our government departments and agencies in compliance with the Missouri Constitution. We need to keep our agencies in their lane, meaning they're not creating regulations and absconding with authority that has never been given them to the legislature. As a parent of a school-age child, I am alarmed at some of the stories that I'm hearing our Missouri departments and agencies participating in. Finally, from a legal and philosophical perspective, the testimony I've heard today about balancing interests. We have to go back to first principles thinking. The Article 1, Section 5 of the Missouri Constitution identifies a conscientious belief objection. That is primary over any balancing of private and public interest. And as a legislator, I am asking you to consider the fact that you are responsible for creating the laws, and the laws need to adhere with the Missouri Constitution.
Thank you so much.
That concludes my testimony.
Representative Perkins.
A real quick question for you, and thank you for coming. In your opinion, is this particular bill about the root of this bill? Is it about vaccines, or is it about managing government overreach?
Well, I think it's two-part. I think it's the testimony we've heard from people in the medical system as well as from parents who are on the receiving end of medical services, seeing that our regulatory agencies are doing things that are not allowed by state statute. So that's a downsizing state government issue. But there's also the legal and constitutional and philosophical principle of how you're going to do public policy. And that has to be rooted in the Missouri Constitution. And that's why I'm saying we need to start with first principles thinking. The solutions that we're looking to do, are they in adherence with the Missouri and the U.S. Constitution, or have we gone down some lane of discussion? I think all the discussion about vaccines and whether or not they're safe and efficacious is not what this hearing was about today. And certainly the COVID vaccine was not addressed at all by the bill sponsor.
Right. No, I tend to agree with you. As it pertains to COVID in particular, I'm far less concerned about the disease than I am the government's ability to seize and take my rights and my beliefs away from me. So I think that it does very much address that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition to the bill.
Hi, excuse me. I'm Jim Blaine, and I'm a family physician from Springfield, Missouri. I've been there since 1977, and I'm here to speak in opposition. I've been involved in public health. I was even interim medical director for the Springfield, Greene County. And public health is something that is, as someone else mentioned, looking at all of us as a family and working out the risk-benefit ratio. And I think that's really the nidus of this bill. Polio. I'm 74 years old now, so I remember polio and all the deaths and all of the horrible things. It's now eradicated as a result of vaccine. Measles, almost the same way. Someone mentioned that 207,000 deaths this last year worldwide from measles. Everyone's only a plane ride away from us. So I guess my concern here is that it's a slippery slope a little bit. And seeing my patients over the past 45 or 50 years that I've been in practice and care, I'm going to do it for a while longer because I really like what I do. I think that the risk-benefit ratio is way, way in favor of the benefit.
Thank you for your testimony. I just have one quick question. I asked another witness earlier. Out of the 15 states that have philosophical exemptions, do you see any outbreaks or problems in those states?
I've not studied that, but if you want to give me your card, I will, and I'll get back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Next witness in favor of the bill. Yes. Please come forward.
I'm Dr. Mary Murphy. I'm a radiologist. This will be anecdotal, but possibly beneficial. So during the COVID pandemic, full-time, I've been reading chest x-rays, CTs of the chest, as patients would present to the emergency department with signs and symptoms of COVID and test positive. During the peak of Delta, I was seeing, I want to say, 5 to 6 very bad-looking chest x-rays and very bad-looking CT scans of the chest per day. That has waned dramatically, and I'm seeing probably 1 to 2 per week right now. And the ones that I do see, instead of being florid pneumonia, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, during the peak of Delta, there were a lot of 8s and 9s, but currently they're 1s and 2s, very minimal infiltrate, and it, thank God, seems to be waning to some degree. Now, whether or not that will change, who knows? But the reason I'm in favor of this bill is I think it's really important to give people who are on the ground, like me, seeing what's happening with Mother Nature over the course of time, the ability to almost real-time give feedback to the legislatures, because whatever mitigation efforts might be out there, be it vaccines, social distancing, hand washing, N95 masks, or what have you, the need for that is going to change as Mother Nature fluctuates. And I think if you
I'm sorry to interrupt,
Okay.
but your time has expired. Any questions for this witness? Thank you for your testimony. And just so everyone knows, you can continue that and submit that testimony online, and we'll get that distributed to the committee. Further testimony in opposition to the bill, please come forward.
Hi, good afternoon. Chantel Dooling with Missouri State Medical Association. Had this, as everybody, this big pretty thing that I was going to give, but I'm going to try and address some of the issues that I've heard and definitely open for more questions. So, Chairman, for years, there has been outbreaks that has been in Oregon. I believe that was measles. And it did show that every patient that had the outbreak after they added conscientious belief did not receive their MMR. There has also been mumps in Washington. There's been multiple outbreaks since adding conscientious belief. So there has been instances where that has happened. This is really a very touchy subject for a lot of people. And I think we need to remember to be respectful of everybody's opinion. When we're outweighing odds and stuff on this, I am a lobbyist, and I've heard many kind of little puns at lobbyists. I'm also a person. I'm also a mother of children, and I do care about my child. So the issues with these, when we're talking about weighing out the odds, we're talking about diseases that can have effects on your spinal cord, effects on your brains, inflammation of the heart, pulmonary embolisms, blindness, death, kidney, liver failure. This is what is being looked at when we're addressing public health on outweighing the odds. We're not trying to take anything away. I'd also like to point out that with the public health, I do want to point out that George Washington did mandate a smallpox vaccination on the Continental Army. I just want to throw that out there. But we're not trying to take any mandates away from each other. But we do have to think about the story of the gentleman with his child. That is just heart-wrenching to me and just drops my stomach. But we have to look at what is safe for all children. We have to, yep.
Thank you. I'm sorry, your time has expired. Questions? Yes, Representative Schnelting, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, thank you for being here.
Sure.
I appreciate your comment about George Washington and the Continental
I'm a
Army.
history nerd.
Yeah, same here. So I'm in the military, so I had to take the COVID shot.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Beside the point, a little beside the point, I've had COVID twice since I've had it. Just throwing it out there, but I understand that rates can be better, when you are vaccinated against various things. However, the military, as you know, as well as the civilian world, are two separate worlds. One is there to serve the other, and in the military world, when you swear an oath to serve your country, you are giving up some of your freedoms, right? Not all of them, clearly, but you are giving up some of them. Sure. In the civilian side, and the whole purpose of that is to defend those in the civilian world. On the civilian side, the whole purpose of government is to ensure our individual liberties. And so I think going back to the whole idea of the conscientious objection, I think it's kind of important to note that there would definitely be a difference between those two worlds, if that makes sense. Just a comment, not really a question, but I do think those two are kind of separate on that front.
Can I comment?
Certainly.
I actually served in the United States Marine Corps, so I completely understand where you're coming from on that. With adding in the conscientious belief, where our concern comes in, especially I am also the product of private and public schools, and so I had many friends in both. Where our concern comes in is losing that herd immunity that has eradicated these diseases. So that's where our concern comes in, is that that's the way that vaccines work. This, in no way, I understand why COVID is being brought into this. I understand where the concern with COVID is being brought in. This would also remove 3 of the current childhood vaccines, one of which they've had outbreaks in Oregon.
Can you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, can you tell me which ones are?
Sure. I just wrote them down. This would remove meningitis vaccine, the measles, and it would remove chickenpox. And it does add into the language proving natural immunity, which I don't necessarily know. I would have to speak with our physicians that we would have the biggest issue with natural immunity. Our biggest issue now is that there is nothing that's standardized that we can go by that proves natural immunity of anything. So without having anything there, we just cannot support removing those for natural immunity proof.
So is the association against the idea of religious or conscientious objections?
No, we believe that there is enough there, and I'm sorry to hear that people are having issues with the religious. I do think that religious exemptions, and we do have an issue with the conscientious because we feel that it could remove the herd immunity, and that, and essentially, is how vaccines work. I'm happy to give you or send you guys information on, no vaccine is 100%, and I know COVID keeps sprouting up, but I'm happy to send you the percentages as what immunizations do offer, the percentage of protection that it does offer for these diseases.
So your concern in regards to the conscientious objection, is it simply that you feel that, or the association feels that there will be a greater percentage taking advantage of that?
It could remove herd immunity, and in essence, once that is removed, we would no longer have these diseases eradicated.
Well, how can herd immunity, though, how can that be removed by an objection versus the religious objection? The conscientious versus religious. So what I'm asking is,
if we added
is your
in
concern just that it would be they would be taken advantage of to a greater degree versus the religious?
I would certainly never say anybody with a conscientious objection is taking advantage of anything. I just wouldn't. I do believe that people do have their own beliefs on this. But as I said, I'm a mother, and I have a belief that I want my child to go to school without having to worry about contracting any of these diseases that no longer are an issue because we do have a herd immunity. And I'm happy to send you information of how the herd immunity works. It's with a certain percentage of people that are vaccinated, it creates protections for the larger group.
Yeah, so I guess my question, just to hone in on this a little bit better, maybe I'm not doing a poor job at actually
Maybe I'm doing
asking
a
the
bad
question.
job of understanding. So,
the association is not opposed to religious objections, but conscientious objections you have concerns about. Is that right?
Yes, we have concerns with
Roger.
conscientious,
Okay.
but
So
we do
on
not have the issue with the religious exemptions.
Okay, so on the conscientious side, why that versus just religious?
With the conscientious, that opens up a much larger, broader window of why you could say that I don't want to. I like to think that every parent
so more
is
people would
as
take advantage of it potentially. I think you answered my question. It's not a trick question, by the way.
I'm not trying to give you a trick.
To a larger
It does.
group.
It's a
I
very
follow you.
broad
Okay.
definition.
Gotcha. Hey, thank you. I appreciate you answering questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair.
Representative Bosco, please proceed.
Thank you. So along those same lines, currently, if we didn't pass this bill, what mechanisms are in place if a parent decides that, little Timmy is a Buddhist monk and he's going to not take any of these vaccines? Like, what evidence do we require people to present to demonstrate their sincerely held religious beliefs under current law?
I can't answer that for you. I really can't. I'm not an expert on what religions set under that. I am speaking from a public health side of it. So, I mean, if you want I am more than happy to get that information for you, and I can get that information for you by digging through statutes, seeing where that stands, and I can get that for you, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a professional on what religions are exempt, what religions aren't. My religion is not a religion that's exempt, but I do choose to vaccinate my child.
Well, I think that my concern here is, as Representative Schnelting alluded to, for starters, there isn't a very clear definition as to what's a recognized religion, what's not. I mean, we shouldn't be trying to do that. But even separate of that, there's really no way whatsoever, even if we were to come up with some draconian set of rules they had to follow, you can't prove that you're of a particular religion. I suppose you could demonstrate you went to a particular church, or if we have enrollment records. But I think we all know what happens when governments start asking people for rolls of people who are on churches. That's a terrible idea. But even separate that, just as a practical matter, there's nothing keeping anybody from just lying about this right now, and we're not seeing herd immunity being destroyed. And so, given that there are clearly people who feel very strongly about this, it seems to reason that, a lot of parents, and I know a decent number that, very, very much are concerned about these types of things. And if you honestly believe that your child is in danger from taking one of these vaccines, I imagine lying is not going to, faze you in the least. And so the fact that we're not seeing a terrible problem now suggests very much that we're not going to see a massive change in the numbers after. All this is doing is letting people come out into the light and state their objection honestly, rather than having to feign some affiliation that they may or may not believe in. I don't see a problem with that at all. Do you?
I mean, I think that's more on a person. Like, if I truly didn't believe in it, I also, if we're going to go by faith, my faith also says, "Thou shalt not lie." So if I'm going to go by faith, I mean, I could use multiple different ways of why I wouldn't go that route. You know what I'm saying?
That's your personal decision, though.
Exactly. That's
but
our personal
we're tasked
decision.
with having to adjudicate that, and I think anytime we can get the government out of trying to determine what's true in someone's heart, I think we're definitely moving in the right direction there.
Sure.
But then again, going back to the practical matters, as far as existing law and these numbers, and your concern about herd immunity, my understanding, if you look at what I think most folks would recognize are major religions in the United States that have a large number of adherents that claim those banners, we're still at a majority of people would fall under one of those categories, whether that be Catholicism, Protestantism. There's lots of various sects, Judaism. There's dozens of different ones, but more people than not currently in the United States consider themselves religious in some capacity. Most of those faiths, you would be able to point to a religious exemption under current law, and we don't see droves of people using that. why would you think that just opening it up to allow someone to have a conscientious belief would suddenly change that sufficiently that it would have a negative impact on public health?
I'm not real sure how to answer this because I can't speak on, like, your personal, how you choose to practice your faith is your decision, just as mine is, just as yours is, just as everybody in this room. So I cannot speak on whether someone wants to choose to lie with their religious beliefs or anything.
I'm talking about people not lying, just people that could use the exemption now, and you would say, yeah, that's probably a fair exemption under current law without any kind of subterfuge. Most people don't,
then
and we
I
don't
would
have a
say
problem.
that those are probably people that don't have an issue with immunization, which is why they're probably not in this committee. Like the people that have shown up today obviously have a very strong passion for it, and that's okay. I fully respect their opinions on anything. I don't think that it's okay to agree to disagree on issues. Where we're coming from is a public health issue. We feel, and our physicians feel, that if we remove this from private institutions and we added in natural immunity and without any structured way of showing natural immunity and removing conscientious belief, we feel that this could potentially remove herd immunity for some of these immunizations. That is where our stance is. As far as if someone wants to, with their religious belief, lie about so that they don't have to, that's their personal choice. And it's not me to it's not my place to speak on that, and it's not my place to judge their religion or why they make the decisions that they do. And I feel like that's kind of where we're spinning off here.
Perhaps. Ultimately, I think the question really becomes, who has the burden of proof here? I would argue that the government, if we were going to make a requirement, it's our burden to demonstrate that not only is that necessary, but the alternative would be, far worse. I haven't heard anything here today that would suggest that if this bill passes, we're going to have any measurable percentage change overall in the number of childhood vaccinations. Lots of people have said that that could happen, and that if it does, that'd be bad. And I'll grant that for the sake of argument. Perhaps that would be, but we have no idea because we don't have any concept of how many people would all of a sudden, choose this conscientious objection that aren't currently, and we don't know how many people are currently choosing not to take the religious exemption that they already qualify for. Without any of that numbers, this is speculation. And your feelings, I grant that you're entitled to that, but I don't think you've met that burden.
Okay. So you're talking about the requirement for them to get these vaccines, but currently, and I would have to go through the bill in here, currently the bill points towards the public health sectors to make this decision. The way that this bill is structured, it specifies, the legislature specifies exactly what immunizations that they can take. If this bill were to pass in the form that it is, like it specifies the DTaP, the hepatitis B, the polio, and measles and rubella.
Those are the list of
But it would put those lists into statute.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's a separate part of. I mean, we can discuss
but
that. What's your
saying
objection
that
there?
the government shouldn't have that. I mean, by all means, if we want to put it in there, that's fine. But you're saying that the government shouldn't have that right to say that. But this would add those specific ones into statute.
Well, for starters, that's the current list. I'm not saying that the government has no place in this discussion. My argument is, I'm hearing testimony from you and from others that if we are to expand the qualifications for exemptions, that will cause this parade of horribles that has been listed. And what I'm saying is, if we don't know, A, how many people could be using existing exemptions but are choosing not to, and B, how many people are just waiting for us to expand these exemptions and are all of a sudden going to, pull the trigger on that, you can't demonstrate that the likelihood that any of those bad things are going to happen would occur. And I would argue that evidence with the existing exemptions would demonstrate that it's a small minority of the population. Most people voluntarily choose to get their kids vaccinated absent these rules, and therefore there is no harm in letting people make their own decisions.
Well, I mean, I think, going back to the chairman's question, I think the fact that there's starting to become outbreaks in states that are adding conscientious speaks to that.
Well, and ultimately...
Well, you're saying that nothing can happen, but it's showing that things are starting to happen.
I mean, I think that's true on both directions. Of course, you're going to have, numbers that are going to change from season to season based on a variety of things. Even if you can demonstrate that a reduced number of vaccinations increased the number of illnesses, which I mean, I'm sure there's numbers out there that you could throw out there that would demonstrate that. I certainly haven't seen anything that suggests that that's a massive problem. And again, we can go back and forth about those the specifics there, but we're talking about what is a procedural change, because as you suggested, there's nothing keeping these folks from just claiming a religious exemption now and doing whatever they want. They're here asking us to say, hey, let me make this decision and recognize the fact that it is my decision, and I don't have to justify it to you as to why. That's what this bill is about in that area, and I think that's what we're getting a little off in the weeds of. But I've gone on too long, so I thank you for your...
Representative Perkins.
Well, thank you for your service also, by the way, and thank you for being here. But I'd just like to piggyback on what Representative Velasco said, and I think for me, once again, it's really not about vaccines. For me, this bill is about identifying the fact that there have been bad players within health departments, within school districts, that have overstepped their bounds, and that no one within any governmental structure has the right or authority to determine whether my religious exemption is valid. Not from a dog catcher to the President of the United States. No one in between. Neither height nor depth nor king or principality have the ability to determine my religious conscience. And for me, that's what the bill is about. But I thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
I do have one question for you, too. I'm sorry.
I hopefully have an answer for you.
I appreciate your service as well. So do you support, because in the armed services, they do allow a conscientious objection when it comes to armed conflict. Do you support that?
Can you clarify that just a little bit more? What do you...
So a person can say, I'm a conscientious objector, I don't want to carry a weapon into battle. They have to allow that in the military. It's a conscientious objection.
Are you asking that on
exemption.
Personal or on behalf of the physicians? Because I don't know that I can answer that on behalf. I mean, I'm more than happy to go talk to our 13,000 members and come back to you, but I don't know that I can answer that on behalf of our physicians.
Okay, I appreciate it.
We can talk personally about it offline if you'd like.
Absolutely. I understand. Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any further questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Next one in opposition. Oh, do we have another support? Oh, yep, please come forward. Sorry, I thought we were out of those.
My name is Rochelle Nelson. And I probably have a very unique situation coming here today. So we've been talking about the religious exemptions. And I believe in my Lord and Savior. Unfortunately, I have a daughter who chooses not to believe that. She does not believe in telling lies. She's an upstanding citizen. She has moral convictions. She does not view herself as religious at all. To not have the conscientious put in that bill would be taking her rights away from her children. I also have a daughter who is a teacher in Jackson County. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but some of the teachers who have chose not to do this shot, they're getting discriminated against. Whether they have religious beliefs or conscientious beliefs. So I'm in favor of this bill for religious and conscientious beliefs.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next witness in opposition to the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Sarah Schlemer. I'm here on behalf of the Missouri Centers of Public Health Excellence, and we would like to go on record in opposition to this legislation. I think what we're seeing across the country is some of these diseases that we had hoped were controlled and eradicated with the dropping vaccination rates, they're starting to creep back up. So I'll just kind of speak to one in particular, and as a new mother, it is one that concerns me a lot, pertussis. So in certain states that we are seeing a drop in vaccinations, particularly ones that have NMEs, which is non-medical exemptions, and more of the loose exemptions around vaccinations, there is a significant rise in pertussis. And so there was a 18-year period that found that states that were granting these NMEs had a higher, 50% higher pertussis incident. And if you know about pertussis, it's one of those diseases that you can't get vaccinated for right away whenever you're an infant because you are very susceptible to it. And about 50% of infants who end up with this disease are in the hospital. So it's one of those scary ones that's popping back up. And so there are instances, there's many instances, I'm submitting testimony with more studies that show that the diseases that are eradicated by some of these vaccines are creeping back up in some of those states that have lowered their standards for exemptions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Any further testimony in favor of the bill? Seeing none, any further testimony in opposition to the bill? Seeing none, anyone for informational purposes? Seeing none, yes, well, I'm sorry, you have already testified, so you can submit that online though, and we will get that to the committee. Anyone for informational purposes? Okay. Opposition? Okay, very briefly. I thought we were there, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Brian Bernskater, not to reiterate, here on behalf of the Missouri Academy of Family Physicians to go on record in opposition to it. There's been a lot of testimony that's already been covered about our concerns about this legislation, so I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And I believe that will conclude our hearing for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming out and expressing your opinions, and we will take it all into consideration.